Now, the hiring of teachers must be made solely on the basis of his qualifications and not on his political thinking. Now, this is the political thinking of teachers especially applies in our universities, where it's interesting that in many of our universities we have the conservatives seem to be, and libertarians seem to be getting the raw end of the picture, and the fact that oftentimes on the conservative end you have maybe only 5 or 10% of the teachers being conservative. And so this isn't right. Even if you're a flaming liberal, you would think you would want a certain amount of balance in there, so both sides are presented. Now, I've done a lot of thinking, why is this this way, that we have so many more people on the liberal side in the universities than the conservative? And part of it is the fact that the liberals are more right-brained and the conservatives are more left-brained. Now, the right-brained people are drawn more into creative things, learning and teaching, and this type of thing. So this explains part of it. This would explain what, if it's like 60, maybe even 70% liberal, but it doesn't explain why in many cases it is so high that there's only 5 or 10% who call themselves conservatives in many of our universities. So this type of, I think the majority of the people want some balance in our colleges where both sides are presented. Matter of fact, most parents that are sending their kids to college don't want any ideologues from either side being presenting strong views. They just want their kids to go there and learn the basics. And oftentimes this is not happening. '59. We support the creation of a streamlined yet fair method of firing teachers, administrators, and professors whose performance does not merit their pay or public support. This should apply to all public employees. The administrators who are released can be hired as teachers if they're qualified. And this is a great problem we have in bureaucracies, as it's becoming increasingly difficult to fire anybody. It's also that way in big business to a degree. In big business, it's very difficult to fire someone. I believe it was AT&T. I read about in one of the Peter Principle books, where they had people that reached their highest level of competence, and then they moved into a new job, and they were proved to be totally incompetent, so they thought, well, what can we do with them? And it was politically incorrect to fire them. So they had this building set aside where they just moved everybody that was useless into this building and had them push papers around. And so they had this building full of incompetent people that they still had to pay because they didn't want to face lawsuits and different legal problems if they fired them. Now, I blame part of that on our government, but in our government it's just about as bad. But unfortunately, if we get a bad teacher or a bad bureaucrat, we don't have some building we could send them to. It would be kind of nice. It's not a bad idea. We ought to create some giant building where we can send every bad teacher and every bad bureaucrat and just put them there and have them play video games all day. That'd be a really good idea. But so private enterprise at least is smart enough to do that. Our government, if we get somebody that's useless, we just keep them there, and they keep pretending, at least attempting to do their job, and oftentimes they do more harm than good in that job. So we need to figure out a way to streamline the firing process so we can get rid of people that are not performing well. Now, if you ever read the book, The Peter Principle, he points out that oftentimes people will perform very well at one job, but then you move them into another job and they'll do just terrible. But what happens is in either a bureaucracy or private business or wherever we are where people are moving up the ladder, that eventually you get to a position where you're not competent. And the Peter Principle says when you get to that position where you're not competent, then you just stay there, because they don't promote you anymore when you show you're not competent. But instead of moving you back down to where you were competent before, the bureaucracy just keeps you where you're incompetent. So people move up the ladder until they become incompetent, and then they'll stay at their incompetent position. And this is why bureaucracies and big business are so inefficient. I've been a salesman a good portion of my life, and I've always hated to sell to big businesses because it was almost impossible to make the sale. You go to a small business and you say, I want to talk to the guy in charge, and the guy in charge will show up, and you give him the sales presentation, and he says yes or no, and that's great. You know, it's satisfying. You go to a big business, you say, I want to talk to the guy in charge, and they'll say, well, there's nobody in charge, you know, that you can talk. Well, what division do you want, or whatever? And so they'll eventually, after a while, you get to talk to somebody, and then they'll say, well, write up a proposal and give it to us, and we'll get back to you in a month. Well, oftentimes it takes about a year to be able to sell a big business or the government or bureaucracy, anything. They're extremely sluggish in making a decision compared to a small business. I love dealing with small businesses because you can be in and out and have a decision, and they can move ahead. And that's why small businesses, even though a small business doesn't have the purchasing power of a large business, they're efficient. Because of their efficiency, a small business, even though they don't have the purchasing power or a lot of the assets, they have efficiency. And because of their efficiency, a small business can often give a better price and performance than a big business. Oh, where did we leave off? Number 60. If any teaching of a partisan political nature is presented in public schools, then the other side should also be presented. For example, if one side of global warming issue is presented in our schools, then the other side should be. Now they say on global warming, the proponents of the standard orthodox global warming theory say the issue is settled, the science is settled, there's no more debate. But we need to talk to the thousands. They've overlooked talking to the thousands of scientists that are debating it. The debate is still on, and a large number of people, close to the majority, are skeptical of it also. And so in any issue like this, and global warming is just one, but global warming is often presented in the public schools. And Al Gore's film is presented in public schools. But if something that's a hot issue where the public is fairly evenly divided down the middle like this, and it is fairly evenly divided down the middle on global warming, just as an example, then both sides should be presented and heard. If both sides aren't presented, well then our students will have a one-sided view, and then when they have to deal with reality, they will not be able to deal with it impartially, because a one-sided view is really a form of indoctrination. And we don't want indoctrination one side or another, either on the liberal or conservative side. We want both sides to be presented if one side is to be presented at all. Actually, hot-button political issues shouldn't be, I don't think, be presented to our students at all. We should stick to the basics, proven science. And if we go off that, however, both sides need to come in. We need to bring in guest lecturers from both sides, or have reading material from both sides, so an impartial conclusion can be reached by our kids. 61. It is the right of the parents to decide how to educate their children, whether it be public or private or homeschool. So the government is always trying to intrude more and more into our educational process, telling us what to do and whether or not we can homeschool or whatever. But it should be the right of the parents. If the parents decide, now if the parents decide we don't want our kids to have an education at all, that's another matter. You know, but if the kids are being provided a good education and the parents are doing it their own way and they're doing it well, then they should, that right should not be interfered with. And I believe the majority would get behind this. 62. Our children should be taught an accurate history of the United States from a nonpartisan point of view. Now, this is an interesting one because it's interesting how deficient in the history of our country our kids' education is. All you have to do is watch Jay Leno to find that out when he interviews our kids going to school. I've seen him interview people with a master's degree or working on their master's degree in college or going to Berkeley or whatever, and they look intelligent, but then he asks them basic questions like who fought in our Civil War? And they'll say, well, we fought against Russia or something like that. I mean, just basic stuff they don't know. And I saw a frightening statistic a while back that said that it was right around 25% of our kids did not know which nation we fought against in the Revolutionary War. You know, some of them said Canada, some of them said France, some of them said Russia, but about 25% didn't know, and a similar number didn't know who fought in our Civil War. I mean, that's about as easy a question. Who fought in the Civil War in the United States? That's almost as easy a question as who's buried in Grant's tomb. Matter of fact, probably a number of our kids wouldn't be able to answer that. So it's kind of frightening. And so we need to have our kids accurately educated about the history of our country so that they have a feel about our roots and the difficulties we went through as a nation to acquire freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of all the freedoms guaranteed in our Constitution, and we want to make sure that we keep those intact. And one way to do this is to make sure that they have a good foundation in history, and the majority, I believe, are behind that 100%. Okay, we'll go into, next week we'll go into the section on the environment, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.